The room smelled of polished wood and old paper, a suffocating mix that clung to my skin as I sat in the corner, my hands gripping the edge of the chair. The lawyer's voice droned on, but my father's words from earlier echoed louder in my head. "This isn't for you." He had looked at me with those cold, unyielding eyes, the same ones that had always made me feel small. I tried to focus on the lawyer's monotone, but the weight of his words crushed any hope I had left. My brother Stephen sat across from me, his smug expression a reminder of the unspoken hierarchy in our family. I wasn't just the forgotten daughter, I was the unwanted one. The will reading was supposed to be a formality, a final goodbye to the man who had ruled our lives with an iron fist. But as I sat there, I realized it was more than that. It was a stage for my father's final act of control. The lawyer cleared his throat, his voice steady as he read through the legal jargon. My father's estate was vast, a testament to his years of hard work and ruthless ambition. I had spent my entire life trying to earn his approval, but now, it seemed, even in death, he had found a way to deny me. Stephen leaned back in his chair, his confidence radiating like the Hawaiian sun outside. He didn't even try to hide his satisfaction as the lawyer listed off the properties, the investments, the money, all of it going to him. I felt a lump rise in my throat, but I swallowed it down, refusing to let him see me break. My mother's voice echoed in my mind, soft and soothing. "You're stronger than you think, Michelle." But was I? Sitting there, I felt anything but strong. When the lawyer finally paused, I thought it was over. But then he pulled out a separate envelope, his expression shifting to something more hesitant. "There's a personal note from Mr. Joshua Kane," he said, glancing at me briefly before looking away. My heart raced as he opened the envelope, the paper crackling in the silence. He began to read, and my father's voice seemed to fill the room, sharp and cutting even from beyond the grave. "This isn't for you, Michelle," the letter began, and I felt the sting of his rejection all over again. "You've always been a disappointment, a reminder of my mistakes. Everything I've built, everything I've worked for, it's for Stephen. He's the son I can trust, the one who understands what it means to carry the Kane legacy." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, each one a deliberate wound. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms as I fought to keep my composure. Stephen smirked, his victory complete. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but the weight of my father's disdain held me back. I had spent my entire life trying to prove myself to him, and now, it seemed, it had all been for nothing. The lawyer folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope, his expression unreadable. "That concludes the reading," he said, his voice flat. But for me, it was far from over. As the room emptied, I stayed behind, my mind racing. My father's words had cut deep, but they also ignited something in me, a spark of defiance, a refusal to let him have the final say. I reached into my bag and pulled out the letter my mother had written before she died, the one she had told me to keep safe. Her handwriting was neat and precise, her words a lifeline in the storm my father had created. I unfolded the letter, my hands trembling. My mother had always been my anchor, the one person who saw me for who I was. Her words were a reminder that I wasn't alone, that I had a voice, even if my father had tried to silence it. As I read her letter, a plan began to form in my mind. My father may have tried to erase me, but I wasn't going to let him win. The next morning, the sun rose over Honolulu, casting a golden glow over the city. But the beauty of the day felt like a cruel joke, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. I sat on the balcony of my small apartment, the letter from my mother spread out on the table in front of me. Her words were a lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't as powerless as my father had made me feel. "Michelle," she had written, "you are stronger than you know. Don't let him take that from you." I sipped my coffee, the bitterness grounding me as I thought about what to do next. My father's will had been a slap in the face, but it was also a challenge. He had spent his life controlling everyone around him, but now he was gone. And for the first time, I realized I had the power to fight back. The letter from my mother was more than just words. It was a weapon, a way to expose the truth my father had tried so hard to bury. Stephen had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in my father's eyes. But I knew the truth. I knew the secrets my father had kept, the lies he had told to protect his precious legacy. My mother's letter hinted at things I had only suspected, pieces of a puzzle that were finally starting to come together. I felt a surge of determination, a fire that burned away the doubt and fear that had held me back for so long. I spent the day going through old photos and documents, piecing together the story my father had tried to erase. My mother's letter mentioned a property on the North Shore, a place I had only been to once as a child. It was a small house, tucked away from the world, a place my mother had loved but my father had abandoned. "Go there," she had written. "You'll find what you need." The drive to the North Shore was long and winding, the road cutting through lush green mountains and along the sparkling blue ocean. But as I got closer, a sense of unease settled over me. The house was exactly as I remembered it, small and unassuming, with peeling paint and overgrown bushes. But it was more than just a house. It was a symbol of everything my father had tried to destroy. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of dust and mildew, the remnants of a life long forgotten. I found a box in the corner of the living room, its contents covered in a layer of grime. Inside were old letters, photographs, and documents, pieces of a life my father had tried to erase. As I sifted through them, I felt a mix of anger and sadness. My mother had loved this place, but my father had turned it into a tomb. One letter caught my eye, its edges yellowed with age. It was addressed to my mother, but the handwriting was unmistakably my father's. As I read it, my heart sank. The letter was a confession, a glimpse into the man my father had been before he became the tyrant I knew. He had loved my mother, but his ambition had consumed him, turning him into someone she could no longer recognize. I left the house that evening, the box of letters and documents in the trunk of my car. My father had tried to erase me, to make me feel small and insignificant. But now, I had the truth on my side. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for my mother, for the life she had tried to build before my father destroyed it, and I wasn't going to let him win. The box sat on my kitchen table, its contents spilling out like secrets begging to be heard. I stared at the letters, the photographs, the fragments of a life I barely recognized. My mother's handwriting was everywhere, her neat, deliberate script a stark contrast to my father's bold, jagged scrawl. I picked up a photo of the three of us, my mother, my father, and me, taken on the North Shore when I was just a child. We looked happy, but I knew now that it was a lie. My father's ambition had already begun to poison everything, even then. I spent hours sorting through the papers, piecing together a story that felt both familiar and foreign. There were letters from my mother to my father, filled with hope and love, and letters from my father to my mother, filled with promises he never kept. But there was one letter that stood out, a letter from my mother to me, written years before she died. My hands trembled as I opened it, her words like a whisper from the past. "Michelle," the letter began, "if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer there to protect you. I'm sorry for everything you've had to endure, for the way your father has treated you. But you need to know the truth." My heart pounded as I read on, her words unraveling the lies my father had built his empire on. She wrote about the betrayal, the secrets he had kept, and the choices he had made that had torn our family apart. One line stood out, burning itself into my mind. "He erased you because he couldn't control you." The weight of her words hit me like a tidal wave, the truth sinking in. My father's rejection wasn't about me, it was about him. He had spent his life trying to mold me into someone I wasn't, and when I refused to bend, he had cast me aside. But now, I had the power to fight back. I knew I couldn't do it alone. I needed someone who could help me make sense of the documents, someone who could help me expose the truth. I thought about calling a lawyer, but the idea of dragging my family's dirty laundry into the public eye made my stomach turn. Instead, I called an old friend, someone who had always been there for me, even when my family wasn't. "Michelle?" Sarah's voice was warm and familiar, a lifeline in the chaos. "What's going on?" I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. But then I told her everything, the will, the letter, the box of secrets. She listened without interrupting, her silence a comfort. When I finished, she took a deep breath. "You need to come over," she said. We'll figure this out together. I packed up the box and drove to Sarah's house, the weight of the truth pressing down on me. She greeted me at the door, her arms wrapping around me in a hug that felt like home. "We'll get through this," she said, her voice steady. "You're not alone." For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. We spent the night going through the documents, Sarah's sharp mind piecing together the puzzle. She found inconsistencies in the financial records, evidence of deals my father had made that were anything but legal. "This is big, Michelle," she said, her eyes wide. "If this gets out, it could ruin everything he built." I felt a pang of guilt, but it was quickly replaced by determination. My father had tried to erase me, but now I had the power to erase his lies. By the time the sun rose, we had a plan. Sarah would help me organize the documents, and I would confront Stephen. He had always been my father's favorite, but I knew he wasn't innocent. He had benefited from my father's schemes, and it was time for him to face the truth. As I left Sarah's house, the box of secrets in my arms, I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just about me. It was about justice. The confrontation with Stephen was inevitable, but that didn't make it any easier. I stood outside his beachfront home, the box of documents in my hands, my heart pounding in my chest. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore was a cruel reminder of the life he had inherited, the life my father had denied me. I took a deep breath and knocked on the door, my resolve hardening with each passing second. This wasn't just about him. It was about reclaiming the truth. Stephen opened the door, his expression shifting from surprise to annoyance. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice cold and clipped. His eyes darted to the box in my arms, his irritation barely masked. I stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, the weight of the documents grounding me. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady, despite the storm raging inside me. He sighed, closing the door behind me, and gestured toward the living room. The room was as pristine and curated as his life, everything in its place, nothing out of order. It made me feel like an intruder, but I pushed the thought aside. I placed the box on the glass coffee table and began to pull out the documents, laying them out in front of him. "What is this?" he asked, his tone sharp, defensive. I met his gaze, my anger finally breaking through the wall of composure I had built. "This is the truth, Stephen. The truth about our father, about everything he did to protect his precious legacy, and the truth about you." His face paled as he scanned the papers, his confidence crumbling with each passing second. I could see the cracks forming, the fear creeping into his eyes. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice trembling as he pushed the papers away. But the tremor in his voice betrayed him. He knew exactly what I was talking about, and so did I. "Don't I?" I shot back, my voice rising. "I know about the deals, the lies, the way he erased me to make room for you. And now everyone else is going to know too." Stephen stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You can't do this," he said, his voice desperate, almost pleading. "You'll ruin everything." He towered over me, his presence as imposing as it had been when we were kids. But I wasn't the same person anymore. I stood my ground, my hands shaking but my resolve unshaken. "He ruined everything," I said, my voice breaking under the weight of my emotions. "He ruined me, and now it's time for the truth to come out." For a moment, we just stared at each other, the weight of our father's legacy hanging between us like a dark cloud. I could see the struggle in his eyes, the battle between his loyalty to our father and the guilt he carried. Then, as if the fight drained out of him, Stephen sank back into his chair, his head in his hands. "What do you want, Michelle?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The question caught me off guard, and I hesitated. What did I want? Justice? Revenge? Or just the chance to finally be seen? "I want my life back," I said, my voice firm, each word deliberate. "I want the truth to come out, and I want you to take responsibility for your part in all of this." Stephen looked up at me, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Regret, maybe, or shame. "Fine," he said, his voice hollow, defeated. "Do what you have to do." His words hung in the air, a reluctant surrender that felt more like an admission of guilt, but I wasn't done. "It's not just about me, Stephen," I said, my voice softer now, but no less determined. "It's about Mom. She deserved better than this. She deserved better than him. His face twisted at the mention of her, a flicker of pain crossing his features. "Don't bring her into this," he said, his voice tight. But it was too late. She was already here, her memory woven into every word, every action. "You think this is just about money?" I asked, my voice rising again. "It's about the lies, the manipulation, the way he made us believe we had to fight for his approval. He pitted us against each other, Stephen, and you let him." My words hit their mark, and I saw the guilt wash over him. For the first time, he looked small, vulnerable, like the brother I had once known but lost. Stephen leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the documents spread out before him. "I didn't ask for this," he said, his voice barely audible. "I didn't ask to be his favorite." His words surprised me, a glimpse of the burden he had carried all these years, but my sympathy was fleeting. "Maybe not," I said, my voice cold. "But you didn't do anything to stop it either." The silence that followed was heavy, the weight of our shared history pressing down on us. Stephen finally looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed and tired. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, his voice cracking. I hesitated, the question hanging in the air. What did I want from him? An apology? Redemption? Or just the truth? "I want you to tell the truth," I said finally. "To me, to yourself, to everyone. That's the only way this ends." He nodded slowly, his shoulders slumping as if the fight had finally left him. "Okay," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll do it." But I wasn't sure if I believed him. Stephen had always been good at saying what people wanted to hear, but this time I needed more than words. I needed action. "We'll see," I said, standing up and gathering the documents. "But if you don't, I will." As I left his house, the box of documents still in my arms, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, anger, sadness. My father's legacy was crumbling, and with it, the hold he had over me. But this wasn't the end. There was still more to do, more truths to uncover. And I wasn't going to stop until I had reclaimed everything he had taken from me. The courtroom was colder than I expected, the air heavy with tension as I sat at the plaintiff's table. The box of documents rested beside me, its contents now neatly organized into folders and labeled exhibits. My lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Evelyn, leaned over and whispered, "Are you ready?" I nodded, though my hands trembled under the table. This was it, the moment I had been working toward, the moment my father's lies would finally come to light. But as the judge entered the room and everyone rose, I couldn't shake the knot of fear twisting in my stomach. Stephen sat on the other side of the room, his face pale and drawn. He avoided my gaze, his shoulders hunched as if the weight of our father's legacy had finally crushed him. I had given him a chance to come clean, to take responsibility, but he had refused. Instead, he had tried to bury the truth, just like our father had. But this time, I wasn't going to let them win. I wasn't the forgotten daughter anymore. I was the one holding all the cards. The opening statements were a blur, Evelyn's voice a steady hum as she laid out our case. She spoke of betrayal, of manipulation, of a man who had built his empire on lies and deceit. She described how my father had erased me, not just from his will, but from his life, all to protect the image he had so carefully crafted. I watched the jury's faces, their expressions shifting from curiosity to disbelief as Evelyn presented the evidence. When it was my turn to testify, I felt the weight of every eye in the room on me. I took a deep breath and stepped up to the stand, my heart pounding in my chest. Evelyn's questions were gentle at first, guiding me through my childhood, my relationship with my father, and the events leading up to the will reading. But as the questions grew more pointed, I felt the anger bubbling up inside me, the years of pain and rejection spilling out in my words. "I wasn't just erased from the will," I said, my voice trembling but strong. "I was erased from his life. He made me feel like I didn't matter, like I was nothing. But I'm not nothing, and I'm not going to let him control me anymore." The courtroom was silent as I spoke, the weight of my words hanging in the air. For the first time, I felt seen, truly seen, and it was both terrifying and liberating. Stephen's lawyer tried to discredit me, to paint me as a bitter, jealous daughter looking for revenge. But Evelyn was ready, countering every argument with evidence, every accusation with the truth. The documents from the North Shore house were our trump card, a paper trail of my father's lies that even Stephen couldn't deny. As the trial went on, I began to see the cracks in his facade, the fear and guilt he tried so hard to hide. The turning point came when Evelyn called Stephen to the stand. He hesitated, his eyes darting toward me, before he finally stood and walked to the front of the room. His testimony was a mess of half-truths and evasions, his confidence crumbling under Evelyn's relentless questioning. "Did you know about the North Shore property?" she asked, her voice sharp. Stephen hesitated, his face pale. "Yes," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "And did you know about the financial irregularities?" Evelyn pressed, her tone unyielding. Stephen looked down at his hands, his silence louder than any confession. The jury watched him closely, their expressions a mix of disgust and pity. For the first time, I saw him for what he truly was. Not the golden child, not the favored son, but a man who had let our father's ambition destroy him. When the trial finally ended, I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, exhaustion, and a lingering sadness I couldn't quite shake. The jury ruled in my favor, awarding me a portion of the estate and exposing the truth about my father's empire. But it wasn't about the money or the victory. It was about reclaiming my voice, my identity, and my place in the world. Outside the courthouse, the sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the city. I stood on the steps, the box of documents in my arms, and took a deep breath. For the first time in years, I felt free. My father's shadow no longer loomed over me, and the weight of his rejection had finally lifted. I wasn't the forgotten daughter anymore. I was Michelle Kane, and I was ready to start over. Stephen approached me as I stood there, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He looked smaller somehow, his usual arrogance replaced by something softer, almost vulnerable. "Michelle," he said, his voice hesitant, "I'm sorry." I turned to face him, my heart aching with a mix of anger and pity. "It's too late for that, Stephen," I said, my voice steady, "but I hope you find a way to make peace with yourself." He nodded, his shoulders slumping as he walked away. I watched him go, a part of me wishing things could have been different, but I knew now that I couldn't change the past. I could only move forward, and for the first time, I felt ready to do just that. As I walked to my car, the box of documents still in my arms, I thought about my mother's letter. Her words had been a lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't alone, even when it felt like the world was against me. "You are stronger than you know," she had written, and she was right. I had faced the truth, fought for my place, and come out the other side stronger than I ever thought possible. The drive home was quiet, the city lights twinkling in the distance as I made my way back to my apartment. I thought about everything that had happened, everything I had lost and gained. My father's rejection had shaped me, but it didn't define me. I was more than his daughter, more than his mistakes. I was my own person, and I was finally free to live my life on my own terms. When I got home, I placed the box of documents on the table and sat down, the weight of the day finally catching up to me. But instead of feeling defeated, I felt a sense of peace. My father's legacy was no longer my burden to carry. I had my own story to write, my own life to live. And for the first time, I felt like I could do it without looking back. I opened my mother's letter one last time, her words a comforting presence in the quiet of my apartment. "You are stronger than you know," she had written, "and you are never alone." I smiled, the tears streaming down my face as I folded the letter and placed it back in the box. My father's voice may have tried to silence me, but my mother's voice had given me the strength to speak, and now it was my turn to be heard.